Have you ever walked into a crowded room and felt something inside you quietly shut down? Stay with that feeling, because by the end of this video, you may realize it wasn't loneliness that was hurting you. It was overexposure. The night this story begins, no one was alone. Music floated across a rooftop bar, glasses clinked, conversations overlapped in safe, predictable rhythms. Laughter erupted on cue, slightly too loud, slightly too rehearsed. At the center of it all was Adrian. Confident posture, sharp suit, perfect timing in conversation. He knew how to socialize. And that was the problem. Every time someone made a shallow joke, he laughed half a second longer than he felt. Every time a controversial idea surfaced, he softened his opinion just enough to avoid tension. Every time the conversation drifted toward something trivial, he followed. Not because he agreed, because he understood the rules. Arthur Schopenhauer once suggested that a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. But what happens when you're rarely alone? Here's the part no one admits. Socializing doesn't usually attack your mind violently. It erodes it politely. At first, it feels harmless. Stimulation, belonging, validation. But beneath the surface, something else is happening. You adjust. You filter. You dilute. And every adjustment is a small act of self-betrayal. Adrian didn't notice it at first. No one does. He told himself this was connection, community, success. But that night, between conversations about market trends and vacation photos, he felt a strange exhaustion. Not physical, but cognitive, as if his thoughts had been kept on a leash. Schopenhauer warned that society runs on compromise, mutual accommodation, restraint. In simpler terms, to belong, you must hold back. The sharper your mind, the more you must blunt it. The deeper your thoughts, the more you must compress them into digestible fragments. And slowly, almost invisibly, your mental edges wear down. Here's the loop you need to pay attention to. If socializing is supposed to energize you, why does it leave you feeling mentally drained? Why does a night surrounded by people feel more exhausting than hours spent alone with your own thoughts? Adrian felt it when he got home. The silence was not heavy. It was relieving. And that's when the uncomfortable realization began forming. What if the very thing society praises as healthy is quietly suffocating the mind? In this video, we're going to examine that question through Schopenhauer's brutal philosophy. And by the end, you may look at social life very differently. If you're drawn to ideas about solitude, mental strength, intellectual depth, and psychological self-mastery, subscribe now. This channel is for those who would rather understand themselves deeply than entertain themselves endlessly. Because what happened to Adrian that night was only the beginning, and what socializing slowly took from him. He didn't even realize he was losing. No humiliation, no argument, and yet, no humiliation, no argument, and yet something felt reduced. Here's where the real danger begins, and most people never notice it. Socializing rarely destroys the mind through trauma. It does so through repetition, small edits, small restraints, small silences. Schopenhauer argued that society requires mutual accommodation. In plain terms, if you want harmony, you must hold something back. But what exactly are you holding back? Adrian began replaying the conversations from the rooftop. The moment he almost challenged a shallow opinion, but smiled instead. The moment he turned a deep thought into a joke. Because the table wasn't ready for it. The moment he felt the urge to stay quiet, and did. Each one seemed insignificant. But here's the hook. What if the mind doesn't weaken from one major betrayal, but from hundreds of minor ones? Every gathering had trained him to do the same thing. Simplify your thoughts. Soften your intensity. Avoid intellectual friction. Prioritize likability over truth. And over time, this conditioning becomes automatic. You stop noticing when you dilute yourself. You stop noticing when you censor yourself. You stop noticing when your ideas remain unspoken. Schopenhauer warned that in society, constraint is always present, especially for the individual with depth. The more individuality you possess, the more sacrifice is required to maintain smooth social exchange. Think about that. A shallow mind doesn't need to restrain much. It has little to conceal. But a rich inner life, it must constantly compress itself to avoid tension. And compression changes structure. Adrian began seeing a pattern in his own life. After years of networking, group dinners, social events, and constant digital interaction, his conversations had become shorter, safer, more predictable. His thoughts still existed, but they stayed internal. Unshared ideas eventually weaken, not because they are wrong, because they are unused. And here's the emotional twist most people fear confronting. The more you adapt to social expectations, the more foreign your authentic self begins to feel. Adrian wasn't becoming less intelligent. He was becoming more socially efficient. And that efficiency came at a cost. Originality, intensity, depth. Schopenhauer believed that society often forces a man to forfeit 3/4 of himself to resemble others. At first, that sounds exaggerated, until you start calculating how much of what you think do you actually say? How much of what you feel do you openly express? How much of your true perspective survives group settings? Adrian realized something unsettling. He wasn't exhausted because people were evil. He was exhausted because performance is tiring, and social life is performance disguised as connection. Here's the loop I want you to hold on to. If belonging requires you to shrink, what happens to the part of you that no longer fits? Does it disappear? Or does it wait in silence, growing restless? In the next chapter, we'll explore something even more uncomfortable. Why the people who crave constant company may not be avoiding loneliness, but avoiding themselves. A week later, Adrian tried something unusual. He declined an invitation. No rooftop, no dinner, no networking, no background noise, just silence. At first, it felt uncomfortable, not peaceful, unsettling. And that's when he understood something Schopenhauer observed with ruthless clarity. Most people do not seek society because they love connection. They seek it because they fear what waits in silence. Here's the hook you need to confront. If being alone feels unbearable, what exactly are you running from? Schopenhauer called it a vacuity of soul, an inner emptiness that makes solitude intolerable. When there is little movement inside the mind, silence becomes oppressive. Time stretches, thoughts grow loud, restlessness appears. So what do people do? They chase stimulation, endless conversation, group chats, social media scrolling, background television, card games, parties, not for joy, for escape. Adrian began noticing something unsettling about his own habits. After every social event, he didn't reflect. He distracted. Music on, phone out, notifications checked, messages answered immediately. He never allowed the mind to settle. And that constant stimulation had consequences. Because here's the paradox Schopenhauer points out. The more you feed the need for external noise, the weaker your ability to generate internal richness becomes. Your mind adapts. It stops producing its own depth. It waits for input. It craves interruption. Silence, instead of becoming fertile ground for thought, turns into discomfort. Adrian sat in his apartment that night with no music playing, no phone in hand. Just quiet. At first, his thoughts raced. Then they slowed. Then something unexpected happened. Ideas surfaced, old questions he had suppressed, projects he had postponed, insights he had never articulated. It wasn't emptiness he had feared. It was confrontation. Social life had protected him from himself. And here's where the deeper danger reveals itself. When you constantly socialize to avoid boredom, you train your mind to fear depth. Schopenhauer argued that a rich inner life protects a person from misery. The wealth of the mind leaves little room for boredom. But that wealth must be cultivated. It cannot grow in constant noise. Adrian realized that most gatherings he attended didn't sharpen him. They numbed him. Hours of chatter that left nothing behind, laughs that evaporated, opinions recycled, ideas skimmed but never explored. It felt lively in the moment. But afterward, hollow. And here's the emotional loop tightening. If your mind needs constant company to feel alive, has it forgotten how to stand on its own? Adrian began seeing something uncomfortable in others too. The ones who seemed most desperate for company were often the most uneasy when alone. Silence exposed them. And perhaps it had exposed him too. But something else was forming. A quiet strength. For the first time in years, his mind was moving without external input. Not reacting, not performing. Thinking. And in the next chapter, we'll confront the most brutal part of Schopenhauer's philosophy. Why society doesn't just distract intelligent people. It suppresses them. Adrian didn't expect the shift to be so obvious. The more time he spent alone, the sharper his thoughts became. And the sharper his thoughts became, the more unbearable certain social environments felt. Here's the uncomfortable question. What if society doesn't ignore depth, but quietly resents it? A few days later, he attended another gathering. Smaller this time. Polite, civilized, educated people. Good company, at least on the surface. The conversation flowed easily. Safe topics, mild humor, agreeable opinions. The kind of environment where nothing offends and nothing truly penetrates. Adrian listened. And then, almost absent-mindedly, he introduced a serious idea. A thought about human motivation. About how most social ambition is driven by fear of insignificance. The table went silent, not hostile, just uncomfortable. Someone laughed lightly and changed the subject. That was the moment it clicked. Schopenhauer believed intellectual superiority offends by its mere presence. Not because it boasts, but because it exposes. Depth disrupts comfort. Serious ideas demand effort. And most social environments are designed for ease, not intensity. Here's the hook tightening. Why is foolishness tolerated, but seriousness treated as arrogance? Adrian started noticing the pattern everywhere. When someone spoke loudly but said nothing substantial, people smiled patiently. When someone made a shallow joke, it was warmly received. But when a real insight entered the room, tension appeared. Schopenhauer wrote that people are expected to show unlimited patience toward stupidity and dullness, while personal merit must almost apologize for existing. Think about that. Brilliance must soften itself. Originality must dilute itself. Depth must disguise itself. Otherwise, it risks isolation. And so most intelligent people learn the rule early. Hide your intensity. Speak less than you think. Never reveal the full extent of your perception. Because social harmony demands mediocrity. Adrian realized something even more disturbing. It wasn't that others explicitly rejected intelligence. It was that they preferred sameness. Society rewards the agreeable. It rewards the adaptable. It rewards those who do not disrupt. Over time, this creates an inversion of value. Conformity becomes virtue. Original thought becomes threat. And here's the slow destruction. If you repeatedly suppress your strongest ideas to maintain comfort, your mind begins to contract, not because it lacks capacity, because it lacks expression. Adrian felt it in real time. In past years, he would have quickly adjusted his tone, made the idea smaller, turned it into humor. This time, he didn't. He let the silence sit. It was uncomfortable, but it was honest. Schopenhauer compared a great thinker to a solo pianist, capable of producing complexity alone. Society, by contrast, resembles an orchestra where each instrument plays only one simple note. Combine enough simple notes, and you get noise, not depth. Here's the loop now fully forming. If the more you grow intellectually, the less you fit socially. What are you willing to sacrifice? Belonging or depth? Adrian left early that night. Not in anger, in clarity. And in the final chapter, we'll confront Schopenhauer's most radical claim, that solitude is not a loss, but a form of psychological survival. Adrian stopped trying to balance it. That was the final shift. For years, he believed the solution was moderation. A little solitude, a little society, a little compromise. But Schopenhauer's insight is far more radical. The mind does not thrive in fragments. It thrives in depth, and depth requires space. Adrian began restructuring his life, not dramatically, but intentionally. Fewer gatherings, longer periods offline, more time reading, thinking, building, more walks without headphones, more evenings without stimulation. At first, something surprising happened. He felt withdrawal, the urge to check messages, the impulse to fill silence, the instinct to seek validation. But instead of reacting, he observed it. And slowly, something stronger replaced it. Self-sufficiency. Schopenhauer argued that the more a man has in himself, the less he requires from others. And Adrian began to experience that truth directly. When your mind becomes rich with ideas, projects, reflection, and creative force, company becomes optional, not necessary. Silence becomes productive, not threatening. You stop chasing noise. You stop performing. You stop shrinking. Here's the final loop resolving. If socializing slowly weakens the mind through constant compromise, what strengthens it? Self-containment. The ability to sit alone without boredom. The ability to think deeply without applause. The ability to exist without constant affirmation. Adrian didn't become antisocial. He became selective. He no longer entered environments that demanded dilution. He chose conversations that sharpened him. And most importantly, he stopped fearing solitude. Schopenhauer wrote that profound peace of heart and true tranquility of soul are found only in solitude. Not because humans are evil, but because inner wealth cannot grow in constant noise. And here is the positive truth most people miss. When you develop inward richness, you do not lose connection. You upgrade it. You begin to value depth over quantity, substance over stimulation, truth over approval. You don't disappear from society. You rise above its compulsions. Adrian didn't withdraw from life. He withdrew from triviality, and in doing so, he recovered something most people never realize they've lost: his full mind. So ask yourself honestly, are you social because you love connection or because you fear silence? If this video made you reflect, the next one appearing on your screen goes even deeper into the psychology of solitude, mental strength, and intellectual independence. Click it now, because the moment you stop fearing your own mind is the moment it becomes your greatest ally.